This is the second video in the mini-series about masking in Darktable. Today we go through how to use the path tool, which is the tool I use the most. It's my go-to tool when I have an area to select in an image. We'll also see how to refine a mask using the feathering radius, using blurring and the contrast options. I'm Nicholas, and let's go. Let's jump right in with this image, which is it's not a photo, it's just a JPEG I made, just to illustrate how the drawn mask works. So I have an instance of exposure here, and in the drawn mask I choose this one, which is the path. Now the path, I think once you're used to it, is the shape you'll want to use the most. So what happens, you choose the path, and if you click on the screen you add a node. So I had 1, 2, 3, and as you'd add nodes, then a nice smooth path is created. Let's go all the way around there, and when you're finished you want to just click on the right button of your mouse, and that closes the shape. So as with this circle and ellipse, the mouse wheel will make the size smaller or larger, and shift mouse will extend the feathering of the mask, and control will change the opacity. Now you can't really see here the opacity, let's put it onto yellow. So the opacity of the mask. They are the same for the gradient, the same for the circle, the ellipse, all these tools. Those are the same controls. What is interesting about this path is that we have the nodes that we can actually control. So each node can be dragged along with the mouse button, so you can reposition that. What you can do also is you can add a new point on the in between two others by control on the keyboard and click, and there I've added one. If I want to remove it, just go on the node and right click, and that's the dangerous one, because if you right click next to it, you know, imagine you're here and you're a bit clumsy and you right click and the whole shape's gone. Now that is a bit dangerous, and that is why, now what do I want? Command Z. Can I get that back? Yes. That is why this show and edit mask elements has an option which is control click, in which case you see I can add a point, move it around, remove a point, but if I right click I can remove a point, but I cannot remove the shape, so I can't get that wrong. So once you've made a mask and it's more or less definitive in its size, opacity and feathering, control click will protect from deleting it. So I'll stay on that. What you can also do, you see when you click on a node, then there's a handle here that comes, and by moving the handle you can actually control the curve around the handle, making it larger for a larger radius of modification, or a tighter radius if you want just a tight radius. So that can be useful. This is very reminiscent of the pen tool in Photoshop. Now I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but at a time when YouTube existed and the pen tool was such it was a big fad, and what had happened is, you know, I'll control click get this, and what had happened is people would do they'd do tutorials on using the pen tool. So if I zoom in, and you know, you'd get this, and you'd click with the pen tool and you'd go around, and this is by the same controls on the pen tool on Photoshop, you know, clicking on the borders, you know, you'd be zoomed in at 3000% or something, and then you also have the same tools here, and you know, you'd be going like that, and you'd be trying to line this one up like that. Well, it works, you know, look, it's actually working, and you can do the same. And here, you know, you control that. I used to think it was dreadful, terrible. I couldn't do it. I felt very inadequate doing it. And when I saw this on Darktable, I thought, no, oh no, never. I'm never going to do that again, to select a shape. And the fact is, you actually don't need to do that on most of your shapes. If you need to do it, it's there. You want a nice solid selection following a path, you can do it. It does work. What you can control on this too is the feathering individually, point by point. So if you want it to be less feathered on one side than on another, then if you can grab, sometimes it's a bit delicate to grab, you can actually grab these individually and feather differently the mask. Okay, so you can kind of get the zone that you want to choose. So that is the basics of the path. The last small modification I'd like to show you is that you can modify the shape not by just clicking on a node, but if you click in between two nodes, left click, you can actually move those, well, the two, I'm actually moving the two nodes in between. Let's create something there, and if I move these two, I'm actually just moving two nodes without moving the others. I'll just illustrate that. Look, just moving two nodes. Another thing you want to know is that if you have, let's get rid of those. If you have a sharp edge here, a corner, by clicking on Control, you choose your start, and if I Control click here and Control click here, I'm actually making straight lines. There we are. See, and then I can go kind of a bit straight there, and then just click without the control button and do a soft click and go around. And if I forgot a corner and I wanted to go there, control click, create another one, and I forgot to control click on this one, you can actually control click on it later. So I'm pressing on control, click, and it turns hard. Control click on that one and it'll turn hard. There we are. So you can change from an angle to a curve, and you can change back again. Control click, we'll turn that one back into a curve, and control click that one too. So these shapes are highly editable, and you can get more or less every shape you like. Don't go watch the old Photoshop tools on that. We don't need it. We've got all the tools we need here, and it'll save you a lot of time, effort, and stress. Okay, let's say now that I want to change the color of this yellow shape that's here. So to do that, I'll go into Color Balance RGB, and I'll do a hue shift. What I need to do is select carefully this yellow shape. Now, you might think that I'm going to spend an hour going around point by point with all the controls, trying to get between the hard angles and the soft edges and trying to select that shape. But really, you'll see it's absolutely not necessary. So I'll go into Draw and Mask and choose a path. I'm just going to go around it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points, doesn't really matter. And there I have selected the shape. Shape selected. And now all I need to do is change the hue. And that is awful. Okay, so selection wasn't very good. This is where the refinements here come in underneath the masks. Now, I made this little JPEG picture just to show you what the feathering radius was. It took me a bit of time to understand, but what it is really is it acts like a color decontamination, if that means anything to you. So it makes a selection, it refines the selection based on color, and that is something you need to know. So if I make the feathering radius go up, then you'll see what is happening here. It is basing the selection more and more on the color. And now I have a good selection of the shape. You see from the previous one here to there, that is a huge improvement. And that should be enough in any photo just to change the hue of a part or a shape in a photo. The thing is, you see, but this, I have a solid green background and blue. So it's not that easy in a real photo. We will see that very shortly. So I'm going to show you what these other refinements do. The blurring radius makes a blur on the shape. It makes a blur on the path, on the drawn path. So if I move that up, you can't really see what's happening. It is making a blur, but it's making the blur here according to one of these 4 options here. So I have input after blur, output after blur, input before, output before. That's a bit blurry in my head. What I do know is that if I put an input before blur, then it actually blurs my path before doing the feathering radius. And that usually is not what I want. So I'll stay with output after blur, which means that it will do the feathering radius first and then blur after. Is that it? Anyway, it works that way around. I can't see the difference, honestly, between input after and output after blur. I just know that I need to stay on the after blurs. Sorry, that's as much as I know. So blurring radius can help get rid of, if you got leaks outside a shape, the blurring radius can help. The mask opacity will be able to give a bit more opacity back to the mask. If when you've blurred it, we've lost a bit of opacity, I can get some opacity back. Now I've got leaks everywhere, haven't I? Because the blur is huge. What I'd actually do is not touch those so much. But what you can do is, if you want to refine a bit and get rid of these parts, you can see some yellow bleeding out here. Now, not that you'd notice that. I mean, honestly, you wouldn't notice that there's any change of colour. The opacity here is so small that usually it's not worth your time to change that. But if you want to do it, you can add some contrast. And what it does is it gives an S-like shape to the contrast of the mask. So everything that is selected in yellow will be, should I say, even more selected. And the parts with lower contrast will get even lower contrast. So that is good for cleaning up. Look, you see I'm actually cleaning up. I had quite a lot of bleed. You can see a bit everywhere there. So I'm cleaning up the shape there. So that's the contrast, and that can be useful too. So there I have a nice selection of the shape, and I can change the hue. Oh, that is very clean. Okay, let's see what happens on some real photos. So let's say I want to select this building and I want to make it brighter. Typically in exposure, so new instance, and I need to select this. Now the selection will be actually quite complicated, and if you want to use a proper pen tool, then there is a lot of work to go all around the edges to do a nice clean selection so that when you darken it, there's no halo or no rim around it with the sky. Now, let's take drawn mask and add a path. And you'll see I'm going to do this. Now, what I usually do is select kind of inside. Select inside. Let's go all around. Let's make a hard transition here. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to manage the bottom part of the photo. I'm not too bothered about that for this demonstration. Right click. I'll turn this into a hard angle. So control click. There we are. Now, I imagine that I could get away here. I had a path here. I could get away with following that grey wall and putting quite a large feather. That's the kind of thing I imagine already. So that any change in exposure will be very gradual and look quite natural on the wall. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, and you see this is really off, so you can spend a bit of time trying to get inside the shape. So how would I do that with handles? I told you I was bad at this. I want to do that. Oh, bring that down. Oh, I'm bad at this. Oh, it doesn't. I don't need to do it anyway. Hey. Selection, absolutely dreadful. We said feathering radius will decontaminate the colours. So, let's see what that does. So feathering radius, move it quite high. There we are. It's not too bad. What I can do is do shift click, try and reduce the feathering if it's escaping a bit too much out there. Now I can do a bit of blurring. Let's get rid of that. There's a little bit of bleeding there in the yellows. I can change the mask opacity, and the contrast should give me, this is the contrast which is going to get rid of all the extra, I don't know if you can see that very well on the video, but here I have some leak here, which I can get rid of by using contrast. And if you look, that now seems to be quite a clean selection at the top, around the edges, and something kind of nice and soft at the bottom. So that looks to be okay. And if I increase the exposure, okay, let's go wild and see how good this mask is. Now, I have some bleeding out there, you see. So let's not feather too much then. Feathering. And maybe it's the opacity. And bring the contrast up. There. Now, I doubt you want to do anything that drastic, but if you want to see how clean it is, then we actually have it there. And that is, well, for me at least, not too shabby. Look, it's following the edges. Now, there are a few little points out there, but if you see, I'm going up 3.9 EV. Now, I'm not sure anyone would ever do anything that wild. If I just want to brighten the photo just a little bit, then you're not going to see anything. That's my philosophy anyway. If it looks okay, then it is okay. Now, I can darken it if you want to see, but I think that's better. So here I have a few artifacts there at the top. But honestly, I'm turning something black here with a shape I made in about 2 minutes flat. So feel free to spend an hour with the pen tool. For me, if I wanted to lighten the building just a little bit or darken it, well, honestly, that's good enough for me. Okay, so that's that one done. Okay then, so back to this, the image as it was before, and what I'd like to do now, so I've erased the mask on this building, and I'd like to select the signpost here and make it darker, and I'll show you that with small masks it's a little bit more delicate to do. So if I zoom in to here to select it, so now I'm stuck on 100. If I press on Control and then the mouse wheel, I should be able to get as far as I want. Sometimes it doesn't work. I get to 170. Oh well, the top left here, zoom 400%. And you can move around on the image just by selecting in this top left the small image, the vignette of the image there, and select here. So we have the name of the street here. So let's do a new instance of what was that for? I reset that instead of doing new instance of exposure, and I want to select this side. So what I do is drawn path, drawn mask and a path, and what I'll do is I'll draw it inside. So I'm going to press on Control and just draw a quadrilateral, not quite a rectangle. 1, 2, 3. Right click for the fourth, and let's bring the feather down. So we have kind of something selected. It's not too bad. So that is the selection for the moment. So what I'll do, I can move this a little bit out. If I feel that on the initial mask I'm not getting everything properly, but let's get rid of that. And I'll move up the feathering. That's the first thing I do. So let's have a look at the mask. Move up the feathering, decontaminate the colours. Now what happens on very small masks is I am feathering by 35 pixels. Now on a small picture, 35 is actually quite big compared to the area I'm selecting. So if I move that up, you can see I'm actually feathering all the way around the selection. So I don't want that to go too far. And what I'll use typically is the opacity of the mask to fill it in. But by increasing the opacity, I have also increased the selected points around here. So I'll move up the contrast, which applies the S-curve on the actual mask, so that everything that was slightly selected is less selected. And I have kind of a mask that's not too bad. Now, the problem I have is that part of the post here is selected. Now, does it matter? I don't know. I'm going to have problems deselecting that because the colour is more or less the same colour, so it's kind of selected into the post there. I mean, I can always blur and get less of that. If I blur, then I'm losing a little bit on the side, which I can get back by moving the opacity, but there again, it selects that again. So with these tools, I don't have an ideal solution. What I can say, if I move that up, I've lost the opacity. This is backwards and forwards getting the same things. What I would do, if I really wanted to get rid of that, is I would do another drawn mask and subtract, but that's for another episode. So I have here a selection, so I wanted to get rid of that. And now I can remove a bit of exposure. And as you can see, the selection is quite clean, even on quite dramatic changes. Obviously, if I go far, it's what we were doing before, you see, is that if I go to very white, I do see some artifacts, which I can reduce by moving the radius up again, but then I lose opacity. So it's all a balancing act, really. And it's also within normal modifications of the picture. So if I move that back, I mean, in a normal scenario, if I just want to get that slightly darker, then I actually I've got the sign slightly darker there. So before and after, and there's no way you're going to see any artifacts around there. So that's good enough for me. In this last example, I'd like to show you how to make a selection based on the details in the photo. So let's go into drawn mask, path, and what I'd like to do is select this damselfly quite carefully. Get a good selection of it. Maybe in the contrast equalizer to add a bit of sharpness. So if you see, I've just made a global path around it, and that is how I usually use the path. The start of the video, I showed you how to adjust the masks very carefully. But the more you watch, the more you'll notice that these masks, I just make them kind of a global selection of an area, and I use the refinements to actually make the precise selection afterwards. So we have a mask here. Let's get rid of the path. Here we just have the selection here, and we have a cursor called details threshold, which I haven't talked about. And this details threshold enables us to make a selection based on the frequencies inside the photo, just like the contrast equalizer works. On the left here, we have the areas of low frequency, which are the areas, let's say, around the damselfly here, which are where the colours are smooth, kind of blurry areas. And the more we go towards the right, then the more we're looking at the high frequencies where we find all the details. So if I move this details threshold cursor to the right, sometimes it says working here, so sometimes you have to wait patiently a little bit. You'll see that the background is being removed, and the inside of the damselfly, where there are details, so in the front legs, the eyes, the head, a little bit on the leaf here, have been selected. So that is a good selection for me. I never leave a mask where it is too sharp, because I'm afraid I'll get artifacts, because the effect will only be applied where there's yellow and not where it's in grey. So I will bring up the feather radius a little bit. I may bring up the contrast if I want to get rid of areas around. Remember, it kind of cleans up the parts that are around the selection, and maybe increase the opacity a little bit just to make sure that I have enough selected inside. So there we are. I have now selected this damselfly, and I can freely now add some sharpness. Now you might think, why am I making a selection based on frequency and then moving this up based on frequency? Well, this enables me to control exactly where I'm applying the sharpness, and usually I get better results. I usually do this for sharpening. I will select the sharp areas of a photo, protect the rest, and then do the sharpening on that. I don't use contrast equalizer so much anymore. Anyway, I use, now 3.8 is coming out, I use diffuse or sharpen for that. So I know I'm using the same tool twice, but this is kind of a way to protect the smoother areas and not add noise. If you had contrast, local contrast into smooth areas, all you get is noise, and that's useless. So here I have before and after, so that's sharpened up quite well. You want me to zoom in to have a look. So that's the effect now. So before and after, before and after, that's sharpened up quite well, and I can't see any artifacts around that. This slider can actually work both ways. Let's say I want to go to the color balance RGB. Let's make a new instance of that and go into drawn mask. I'm not going to use the path for this. If you just have a drawn mask and don't draw a mask, what you've done is you've selected the whole photo. So keep that selected, and in the details threshold, move it down. So now I'm removing the areas of high frequency. I'm just keeping the areas of low frequency. So what I'm in effect doing, that's too far, is selecting everything that's around the subject. Feathering radius up a little bit. Now I want to get rid of what's inside here, so remember that is the contrast. There. And the opacity, might bring that down a little bit here, just to recover. And there we are, a good selection around there. Now blurring. Oh, I do try these, I can't really see. Not really fussed. What I do have now is I have kind of selected everything but what was in focus. And there, imagine I want to add some saturation. I'll do this a bit more, just so you can see. And that has only happened around the subject. So there we are. That was a way, quick and easy way of selecting the smooth areas of a photo. So that'll do it for this video on the drawn masks and especially the path. Next time we'll see how to make different drawn masks interact with each other by making unions, intersections, differences, etc., etc. So there we are. Well, I'll see you soon. Take care.